Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Trump says there's a good chance a peace deal can be made after US-Ukraine talks in Florida as Zelensky meets Macron in Paris. British SAS soldiers are accused of war crimes in Afghanistan as an ex-officer gives evidence during an ongoing inquiry. And British MP Tulip Siddiq, the niece of ousted leader Sheikh Hasina, is given prison time in Bangladesh over corruption allegations. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Paris today as peace talks continue to end the war. It follows a weekend of meetings between the US and Ukraine in Florida, which US Secretary of State Marco Rubio called productive. Speaking on board Air Force One, President Donald Trump said there was a good chance a deal could be made. Take a listen.
A lot of people are being killed. Last month, we had 27,000 people killed in that ridiculous war that should have never happened. It would have never happened if I were president. Ukraine's got some difficult little problems. They have some difficult problems. But I think Russia would like to see it end, and I know Ukraine would like to see it end. There's a good chance we can make a deal.
For more on this, I'm joined from New York by Global Affairs Analyst and former US diplomat at the United Nations, Jonathan Wachtel. Jonathan, a pleasure to have you on the show with me this evening.
Hello, Leigh-Ann.
So I just want to pick up on Donald Trump. So he says there's a good chance we can make a deal after 4 hours of talks between Ukrainian and American delegations over the weekend. Trump has said this so many times before, and we seem no closer to an agreement. Why is this time any different?
You know, Leigh-Ann, it may not be any different. This is a really intractable conflict right now in which Ukraine is refusing to give up essentially about a fifth of its territory and doesn't want to reward Russia for invading its country. And the Russians, of course, feel that they have the upper hand. Vladimir Putin is continuing to pound Ukraine and wants to make the point clear to Ukraine that they have to cave in and essentially agree on Vladimir Putin's terms. So we really are still in a stalemate despite the flowery words that are coming out.
And it's interesting because we're in a stalemate, but with so much diplomatic talks happening, aren't we? But President Zelensky is in France today to shore up European support. And like you say, hours after deadly strikes hit Kyiv, killing at least 4 people. We heard from Zelensky, and he says Ukraine's priorities are security guarantees and maintaining sovereignty. How pivotal is Europe in ensuring this does happen?
Well, Europe has bared witness to what happens when the Russians, when Moscow and the Kremlin's not held accountable. Hungary has a history in which they were invaded. The Czechia now, but the Czech Republic also had to go through an invasion. Poland was under pressure. The Baltic states, if you look at a country like Lithuania, for instance, it was taken under Soviet rule after World War II, and it took decades for it to liberate itself from control of Moscow. So Europe has reason to be concerned about the outcome of what happens here, and any sort of settlement, if it essentially rewards Russia for its aggression, it'll just open up the way for yet another major conflict, if not within Ukraine itself, some other country, neighboring country or region that would be affected by aggression.
And let's talk a little bit about Steve Witkoff, because he's in Moscow, and that's the 6th time this year that he's going there, and he'll be alongside Jared Kushner after both of them met the Ukrainian team in Florida. Following that 28-point peace plan, are there now concerns Steve Witkoff will sell Ukraine down the river?
Certainly, that is a Ukrainian concern, which is why you saw Zelensky hanging out with Macron today, trying to shore up Europe's unified position to look after Ukrainian interests here, because Ukraine feels like the plans so far coming out of Washington have been very much in favor of the Russian position on this. And so, we shall see moving forward just how effective Witkoff's meetings will be with Putin. But certainly, we're stuck in a place in which there can't possibly be a full, writing off of Ukrainian territory to Russia by Zelensky if there aren't some sort of security guarantees or some other mechanisms in place to look after Ukraine's core concerns here.
And it's really interesting because we talk about security guarantees. And Jonathan, it's something that's come up a lot. And of course, Macron also says Ukraine's allies must be around the negotiating table to ensure security guarantees. But we are no closer to knowing how those security guarantees will work and which countries could possibly go and put boots on the ground. There doesn't seem to be any clarification on what security guarantees could look like. We've spoken about them a lot, but nothing else is so clear.
That's right, Leigh-Ann. And, all of what we're witnessing is essentially the playing out of the inability of countries that had made promises to look after Ukraine, essentially dropping those promises and not following through. And what I'm referring to here, namely, is when the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine inherited one of the largest nuclear arsenals and decided through a memorandum called the Budapest Memorandum, which included Russia, the UK, France, the United States, that essentially Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons, give them to Russia, and in return, Ukraine and Ukraine's sovereignty would be kept intact, that Russia would stay out of its territory, essentially. Well, that certainly didn't happen. So whatever guarantees are in place, Ukraine really wants to make sure that they're robust and meaningful, not just lip service, because, the past is the best predictor of what can happen in the future here. And it doesn't look good. What we may end up here in terms of some sort of peaceful end to at least the fighting right now is to enter a space in which the killing of one another, the attacks would stop, and we would end up with a frozen conflict. Something like what we have with Korea, for example. That might be the outcome, the best outcome that we can expect at this point.
And Jonathan, Russian President Vladimir Putin will be in India at the end of this week for the annual summit talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is actually his first visit since the Ukraine war. What will Putin be looking to achieve?
Well, one of the main things that Putin wants to achieve, and he seems to be winning in this space, is to continue selling oil, petroleum products, oil to India. That is certainly a financial lifeline for Vladimir Putin to continue with the war. A lot of money coming through. And Prime Minister Modi made it abundantly clear that India has its own national interests. And even though there was pressure coming in from President Trump for India to stop buying Russian oil, it didn't really materialize, and we are in the place where we are. So that would probably be a primary concern of Russia's. And Russia and India have enjoyed wonderful relations, actually, for decades. Since the creation of the Soviet Union, Russia has been a major weapons supplier to the Indians.
Jonathan Wachtel, brilliant to have you on with your insights and thoughts. Thank you as always. British special forces have been accused of committing war crimes in Afghanistan during the US-led coalition against the Taliban. A former officer has told an ongoing public inquiry that nothing was done, despite it being widespread knowledge. Britain's Ministry of Defence ordered the investigation after a TV documentary reported SAS soldiers had killed 54 people in suspicious circumstances during the war over a decade ago. For more on this, I'm joined by former Deputy EU Special Representative for Afghanistan, Professor Michael Semple. Professor, thank you so much for your time this evening. So, a former senior officer has broken ranks and is alleging British Special Forces committed war crimes in Afghanistan. What is your reaction to the details emerging from this public inquiry?
I think that the stories that our special forces conducted summary executions, basically killed Afghans against the rules of law, these have been around for many years. But what we have going on at the moment is it's not a criminal trial. There's no soldier on trial, and the inquiry is not going to establish definitively whether British Special Forces kill people. What they're looking at is the handling of the information as it reached the command chain in the British Army and the Ministry of Defence, to establish whether the leaders of the war, to establish what they knew when, and whether they took sufficient measures to clamp down on alleged violations of the rule of law. So what the testimony, which has just been released, although it was actually submitted some time ago, what is suggesting is that yes, people who were involved in supervising operations, they had concerns at the time, they raised those concerns to the top of the command chain, and no adequate action was taken. And when some kind of investigation was launched, it was more papering it over rather than actually trying to establish the facts. That's a very serious allegation.
So the inquiry chair has released over 100 pages of classified documents regarding the Special Forces unit called UKSF-1, accusing them of things like murdering children. Does there need to be a reckoning of the role of Britain in the Afghanistan war?
Well, this is a reckoning going on, and I should say that this is a very serious exercise. It has been established by the government. It enjoys full independence, and members of the armed forces have been given authorization by the top of the command to submit their testimony. So they don't have to break ranks. So they're allowed inside their own rules allow them to submit this evidence. But absolutely, it is important to take account, not just to take account of the men who are on the ground, who may well have killed people, who may well have killed prisoners after they had surrendered, may well have planted guns on people who had been shot unarmed, but then they pretended that they'd been armed at the time they're shot. It's not just an accounting of that. It's absolutely critical that there should be an accounting of what the military command does and the bureaucracy that sits above it when they get this kind of disturbing report, because alas, this is not the last conflict that we could expect UK or its allies to be involved in.
And it's interesting because after hearing evidence from this anonymous whistleblower in Afghanistan, is there a systematic problem in the armed forces, do you think? Because we're just talking about the higher ranks papering over things.
Well, I think this is really going to be the main focus of the remainder of the inquiry, and I'm certainly waiting to see what the judge comes up with at the end, because it's incredibly important. It's not just about the conflict in Afghanistan. It's about any place that a government decides to send its forces. Can it rely on the command of the military to deal with serious allegations? Because look, war, alas, has been going on for tens of thousands of years. Armies have often committed atrocities. The question is, do you clamp down on it when you get evidence? And obviously, the testimony that we've been looking at today suggests that the response was far too slow and not serious. And in fact, that the suggestion in the testimony, which the judge now has to evaluate, is that deliberately the top of the Special Forces Command deliberately covered up the serious allegations that they received.
Professor, how detrimental is an inquiry like this for those British Special Forces who did put their lives at risk in Afghanistan, because the British Army has really great soldiers, many who are honest, many great people who are in the Special Forces. What does this do for morale, and does it put a black mark on the UK's involvement in Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, let's be clear about this issue. Whether is the inquiry the problem or is the inquiry somewhere else? Personally, I think that the inquiry was absolutely necessary, and there seems to have been quite a good response to it by many members of the Special Forces, because the initial complaints were not raised by members of the public or even raised by Afghans. The initial reports about this and complaints and demands for action came from it within UK Special Forces, precisely because these are elite professional soldiers who have devoted their lives to serving their country, and they do not want their reputation to be tarnished by units which have gone rogue and which have been allowed to continue going rogue. So, I mean, the problem isn't with the inquiry, but that they clearly the Special Forces and indeed members of the government who will be taking decisions on their deployment in future, they're looking to see what reassurance do we have that bad actions will be brought up the command chain and will be dealt with promptly. And I think if the work of this inquiry and the judge who's presiding over it gives some reassurance that the command chain is working properly and that there is no impunity for this kind of action, I think it will be a reassurance to members of the Special Forces.
And what do the people of Afghanistan make of what's happening now in the UK with this inquiry? Because we've heard, like you said a little bit earlier, allegations of this for a really long time.
Yes, I'm very glad that you ask about the Afghan perspective. As a scholar of Afghanistan, and particularly of its conflict going on for over 4 decades now, alas, I myself have taken testimony from Afghans who have suffered all kinds of violations, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, committed by a series of different forces, whether it was the Afghan communist government, the Mujahideen fighting against it, the Soviets, different militias associated with the Republican government over the past couple of decades, or indeed militias backed by the CIA. Alas, successive forces have carried out massacres, summary executions, and I think there's a tendency amongst Afghans to look at them and think they're all the same. There is essentially no moral difference between any of the forces which have been involved in the decades of conflict. Now, personally, I think that's incredibly dangerous. There is a difference between a disciplined force which holds its men and women to account and the kind of militias which run roughshod over the law. Afghans are, at the moment, I think if you ask most Afghans, they say no. We think they're all the same. We think there's no accountability. Neither have Afghan regimes, the Taliban or those before the regime, nor any of the foreigners, whether it be the Soviets or the Westerners. None of them have held their people to account. And this inquiry is part of the process of offering some answer to that deep cynicism and deep sense of hurt from the Afghan population.
Professor Michael Semple, thank you so much for your thoughts and for talking to me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. At least 146 people are now confirmed dead after a massive fire tore through a Hong Kong apartment complex, with more than 100 still unaccounted for. The flames ripped through 7 high-rise towers and took days to fully extinguish. The fire, Hong Kong's worst in decades, has set off a growing investigation that's already led to several arrests. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked President Isaac Herzog for a pardon over corruption cases, saying it's in the national interest. Netanyahu, on trial for bribery and fraud, says a pardon could help unite the country. Opposition leaders insist he must admit guilt and leave politics first. Herzog has yet to decide, with justice officials reviewing the request. Honduran presidential candidate Nasri Ashraf, backed by US President Donald Trump, is holding a razor-thin lead with 56% of ballots counted. Preliminary results put him at about 40%, just 4,100 votes ahead of the Liberal Party candidate. And Dignitas has announced the death of its founder, Ludwig Minelli, at the age of 92. The Swiss lawyer and former journalist launched the assisted suicide organisation in 1998. Dignitas said the clinic would carry on his work. Now, the UK MP Tulip Siddiq has been sentenced to 2 years in prison in Bangladesh over corruption allegations. She was found guilty of influencing her aunt, ousted Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, to secure land in the outskirts of Dhaka. Siddiq, who lives in London, rejects the claims and is unlikely to serve the sentence. For more on this, I'm joined by our UK correspondent, John Beaver. John, great to have you on the show with us this evening. What has Tulip Siddiq said in response to the sentence she was handed this morning?
Well, she's described it as a Kafkaesque nightmare. She claims that the whole process has been flawed and farcical from the very beginning. She went on to say that she's absolutely baffled by the whole thing. She claims that she had no contact whatsoever with Bangladeshi authorities or anyone from the legal system there, saying that despite them spreading what she calls malicious allegations about her for a year and a half, she heard nothing from them. She said there was no summons sent to her. There was no charge sheet, and there was no correspondence from them at all. She added that she's not difficult to find, saying they could have written to her at the House of Commons, of course, where she serves as an MP. As you mentioned, this is all tied in to allegations that she influenced her aunt, the ousted former Prime Minister, to secure a plot of land for her and her family. Now, those are allegations that she strongly denies, and she's called the whole process politically motivated.
And what's been the reaction from her own Labour Party and from other UK politicians?
Well, they have backed her own colleagues. They have pointed out exactly the same sort of things that Tulip Siddiq herself has criticised. The Labour Party spokesperson saying that they don't recognise the judgment. They highlighted the flawed legal case, the fact there were no formal charges, the lack of opportunity for her to defend herself. So very much her colleagues in the Labour Party support her and what she has said and what she's done. She, of course, stepped down from her role as a junior minister when this all came to light many months ago, saying that she didn't want to cause a distraction, and an internal investigation found no evidence of impropriety. They did say, though, that she should have been more aware of the reputational risks because of the link to her aunt. So that really was the one area of criticism that her own colleagues levelled at her.
So what happens now, and what's the wider impact of all of this? You mentioned reputation there, but is there any chance she'll serve that sentence in Bangladesh?
No, it certainly doesn't appear that she will. Tulip Siddiq's legal team have said she doesn't even have a valid Bangladesh passport, that she's never had an ID card there. Those were certain things that were highlighted by investigators in Bangladesh, and saying that she was a Bangladeshi citizen. So all of these things are being disputed by Tulip Siddiq's legal team. They certainly oppose every fundamental element of this. Interesting that you mentioned reputational damage again there, because of course it's the standing between the two countries, and really a lot of people looking at that as this is not going to help relations between the two. A group, for example, a group of very prominent UK legal figures wrote to the Bangladesh's representative in the UK last week, highlighting their concerns about the case. So certainly this is an issue that will have caused some problems between the two nations, and it's something that we're not expecting to hear the end of yet. We are, of course, waiting to hear more about the death sentence that was given to Tulip Siddiq's aunt, the outlawed former Prime Minister who is currently living in India and who denies the charges against her. Bangladeshi authorities have also said there are further investigations taking place about Tulip Siddiq herself. So we are expecting to hear more about that in the coming weeks. But Tulip Siddiq has always denied any wrongdoing in any of this.
And John, we're also hearing right now that the OBR chair, Richard Hughes, has now resigned over the budget leak that we did get, and that was last week. And also today, we're hearing claims that the UK Chancellor misled the public and Parliament ahead of the budget that was also delivered last week. What's happening in the UK? What more can you tell us? So we just know the OBR chair, Richard Hughes, has resigned, and there is a whole storm happening around Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, there absolutely is. And as you say, this has just broken in the last couple of minutes that the OBR's chair has said it's in the best interests of the OBR, that's the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, for him to resign as its chair and take full responsibility to the shortcomings identified in the report. So this all to do with a leak, the fact that after weeks of pressure on the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, before she presented her budget to Parliament last week, the whole thing was leaked by mistake, so they say, by the Office of Budgetary Responsibility. They've always said there was no malicious intent, there were no malicious actors making this more difficult for the Chancellor, that the leak was an error, but certainly it was hugely embarrassing for all involved. And all of this, as you say, coming on a day where the UK Finance Minister, that's Chancellor Rachel Reeves, has been under intense pressure because there are allegations from her political opponents that she played down certain positive figures when it came to the economy and very much concentrated on the worst possible outcome scenarios that were presented by the OBR, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, and others who go through and look at all the figures in regards to the UK economy. Well, they say that the Chancellor looked very much at the negative and not the positive, and she did that so that she could pass more welfare spending, that she could raise taxes, and that she could use it to push her own agenda. Now, the Chancellor has denied that, saying that she did what she had to do when it came to the budget last week and the raising of taxes for certain groups of people and the cutting of some public spending as well as boosts to welfare spending, all incredibly complicated. The Chancellor saying she didn't mislead anyone, she didn't mislead the public, she didn't mislead Parliament. Her opponents, though, calling for her resignation, as they have been for several weeks, it is worth pointing out. She is in a very difficult position at the moment because plenty of her opponents just do not rate the way that she is trying to get the UK economy back on track. They say that she's not looking for growth, that she's focusing on the negatives. But she's arguing, and she has been backed by her boss, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, very much saying that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor here in the UK, is doing a good job and she is helping to get the UK economy back on track. But yes, as we say, in the last few minutes, the resignation of the chair of the OBR is just adding to this whole mess. It's just yet another headache for the Chancellor and for the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, to have to deal with, because they are very unpopular and there will be a lot of people waiting to see whether the measures introduced by the Chancellor in the budget last week will start to make a real difference, and a real difference soon, to help people in the UK who are struggling.
John, thank you so much. And I just want to reiterate there exactly what John was saying to us. The OBR chair, Richard Hughes, has resigned, and that's over the budget leak in the UK. Thank you so much once again, John. At least 334 people are dead after Cyclone Diplomat slammed into Sri Lanka, with hundreds still missing. Nearly 1 million more have been impacted by heavy rains and floods that swept through large parts of the country last week. Chris Gilbert reports.
Floodwaters remain chest deep. while the rescue efforts continue. Boats are needed to rescue stranded families in the commercial center of Colombo, one of the worst struck places. Some can do nothing but simply stand and wait. Locals say the speed of flooding took everyone by surprise.
Overnight, things seemed normal, but by morning, everything was underwater, including our house. 7 of us, including children, took refuge on the top floor. There are another 15 adults still in the area. Their houses are completely underwater.
Buildings remain inundated after rain lashed the country from Thursday. The deluge triggered multiple landslides in the hilly center of the island nation, while overflowing rivers submerged entire towns nationwide. It's believed to be the worst disaster to hit Sri Lanka in decades.
As a country, we are facing both the largest, most challenging natural disaster and most difficult rescue operation in our nation's history. This is the first time the entire country has been struck by such a disaster.
More than 24,000 police, army, and Air Force personnel are still trying to reach stranded families. The Air Force lifted 120 people to safety after water breached a dam in the Mapul Adu Reservoir. Meals are being supplied by donations and state groups, but many say they cannot receive adequate help. Power, water, and communications are still out for most of the country after transmission lines and transformers were swept away. Authorities say they'll be gradually restored over the coming days. It follows a devastating week for South Asia, with almost 900 dying in storms and flooding throughout Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Sri Lanka now joins the list of countries that must wait for the waters to recede and take stock of the damage. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
Now, Airbus operations are returning to normal today after announcing the modification of most of its A320 fleet. The European plane maker has been plagued by safety concerns, including a recent mid-air incident on board a JetBlue aircraft. Shares in Airbus were down 2.1% in early trading in Paris today. For more on this, I'm joined by former airline pilot and aviation expert Terry Tozer. Terry, a pleasure to have you on the show with me this evening. Airbus stock has plummeted today as Airbus gave an update on another flaw apparently affecting the A320 fuselage panel. How concerning is this following the massive recall just a few days ago?
Well, I think Airbus have dealt with it pretty well. I don't think there is anything to be immediately concerned about, really. They got on top of this software issue very quickly and were very open about it. And, I think they've taken the correct actions.
And just a few days ago, as I mentioned, and you just said, we witnessed Airbus recalling 6,000 A320s, and that was due to the software issue that they had. That seems to be under control now. But how unprecedented is the scale of this particular recall? Because 6,000 aircraft sounds a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And had it been a different type of problem, it would have caused major disruption and really serious financial issues for the airlines and for Airbus themselves. But there is, we have to bear in mind that the Airbus is a fly-by-wire aircraft. So the pilots are connected to a bank of computers which all operate with several levels of redundancy in order to make it safe. And what happened here was that a solar flare, it had an impact on some of the electronic input, and older aircraft were actually, ironically, not affected as badly, because this is a problem that has been known about for some years in terms of general physics. So the more sophisticated, more modern aircraft were more vulnerable. They've resolved that with an update and a software change. And I think because it was software, it was able to be completed on the majority of aircraft within 2 or 3 hours. Otherwise, the disruption would have been much, much greater.
And you were actually a passenger on an A320 plane, and that was on Friday, so literally just a couple of days ago. And should people going on holiday or a trip be concerned about travelling on one of these aircraft at all?
No, I don't think they should. And it certainly never crossed my mind to be concerned about it. We did know what happened to JetBlue a while ago. It was, I think, November. It was pretty well known what the issue was. Many of the airlines, including the one I was flying with, had already taken remedial action before Airbus issued the notice. And that's another reason why the disruption was relatively small. So generally speaking, although it's easy for people to compare it maybe with Boeing, this is a light years away from the dreadful situation with the Boeing Max. This is a relatively simple issue that's been resolved, I think.
And that's exactly what I wanted to speak to you about, Terry, because I wanted to ask you about the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. It's faced these unprecedented issues and has been grounded on more than one occasion. And how does Airbus compare? And obviously, we've seen some absolutely horrific situations when it comes to Boeing planes and the loss of life.
Yes, I mean, the whole debacle over what happened with the Boeing is absolutely awful, and it was unprecedented, and it came, frankly, from a change of culture at the top of the airline, as well as very weak regulation in America from the Federal Aviation Administration, who allowed Boeing to mark their own homework. And the CEO at the time boasted about the fact that he had changed Boeing from an engineering company to a business. And Boeing hitherto had been famous for the quality of its engineering. And I think that's where the rot started. And the behaviour of the management in that case, I think, was absolutely appalling.
Terry Tozer, thank you so much for speaking to me and giving us your reassurance there about getting on an Airbus plane if we are heading anywhere for the holidays. Let's take a look at the top business news now. South Korea's largest online retailer, Coupang, has apologized after a data breach involving around 34 million customer accounts. The breach marks the latest in a series of leaks at major firms in the country. Coupang said they became aware of the unauthorized access of personal data of about 4,500 customer accounts in November. Bitcoin fell below $90,000 on Monday following last month's steep decline. Since its inception in 2012, Bitcoin's value trended upwards at around 9.7% in December, while September recorded even more losses. The latest plunge has been linked to investors' exposure to Bitcoin through ETFs, which were approved in January 2024. Turning to all the sports news now, and Formula One is heading into its first final race championship showdown after Red Bull's Max Verstappen won a dramatic Qatar Grand Prix. McLaren's Lando Norris championship lead has now been cut to just 12 points heading to Abu Dhabi next weekend. The win was Verstappen's 70th Grand Prix career victory. Exciting next week. And Chelsea and Arsenal's London derby ended in a 1-1 draw at Stamford Bridge. It's another blow for Chelsea, who have received 4 red cards in 11 league games this season. Arsenal continue their 5-point lead at the top of the table. A reminder of our top stories. Trump says there's a good chance a peace deal can be made after US-Ukraine talks in Florida as Zelensky meets Macron in Paris. British SAS soldiers are accused of war crimes in Afghanistan as an ex-officer gives evidence during an ongoing inquiry. And British MP Tulip Siddiq, the niece of ousted leader Sheikh Hasina, is given present time in Bangladesh over corruption allegations. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for watching.